and suddenly everything boinged into view. So my father wasn't my father, and my mother wasn't my mother. And the so-called Earth was roughly the size of a football field and just happened to glide underneath my feet as I walked. I bent down to examine a flower and found it full of random mutation. It was giving birth to a bee, an incredibly painful process. So there would be buzzing today after all. An infernal sound, difficult to describe, easy to mimic. Gotta back up here. Buster Brown. Just thought of that little poem when I was taking a shower. There was more to it, but I can't remember. I wanted to talk about contagion. The idea of contagion. What are the bullet points for this morning? Let's talk about contagion, mental contagion, spiritual contagion, physical contagion, in other words, disease, plague, and illusions of feeling, kinesthetic illusions. And Jesus. What did I talk about Jesus? And leprosy. There was one more thing. The illusion of space-time. And what was it? I got it in the tip of my brainstem. Oh yeah, apathy. It's a tall order. Let me see if I can make this sandwich. Contagion is an idea present throughout René Girard's work. Yesterday I was talking about René Girard and mimetic desire. In the Girardian schema, mimetic desire naturally tends toward a state of contagion, of community-wide contagion. And the scapegoat as a figure comes up repeatedly, incessantly in Girard's thinking, as a kind of safety valve for the community to discharge its collective rage. So, the figure of Oedipus, or of Christ being the first scapegoat who is revealed to be innocent, and thus undoes the scapegoating mechanism. But prior to all that is simply the notion of contagion, the idea that because of the human tendency to mimic, and to imitate, and to sponge up each other's essences, like so many squids, ideas and feelings of guilt, or oppositely of ebullience, jubilation, tend to pass into, in a negative sense, infect communities. And now that we have this globo homo world, the reach of contagion is global, and there's this concern about the coronavirus, that it will have a global reach. I don't know anything about it, how well founded it is. But I was kind of sucked into a wormhole this morning, just reading about it on my handy-dandy smartphone. My handy-dandy sugar candy smartphone. And watching some YouTube videos and so on. And there are different models that predict how viruses like this will travel, and different mathematical models based on predictions about what kind of people associate with every people. A very simplistic model would have it that everyone interacts with everyone equally. But in fact, people of similar beliefs, similar occupations, classes, and so on, tend to aggregate more, and so the possibility of a global outbreak is actually hindered in some part, in some not small part, by this sort of diversity of organization. That, people freaked out about the Ebola virus traveling and infecting everywhere, but because there still exists some structure to human organizations that in fact everyone does not interact with everyone in a kind of random distribution. It is possible to stem the tide of these things when they occur, but it might be notable that China is the one being afflicted because they do have a much more homogenized culture. And so the virus would be more easily spread in that type of environment. Awkwardly trying to jump from bullet point to bullet point like a frog across lily pods, lily pads, pods. I put all my earthly belongings in a pod, in a space pod. Hope it's all right. But there's an interesting bit of social psychology that often comes to mind about how adrenaline and other hormones and just feelings in general in the body are subject to interpretation. I've talked about this before, but there have been experiments run, for instance, where a drug, some kind of amphetamine type of adrenaline-raising drug is given to subjects in test group A and test group B, and test group A is told that the drug improves intelligence, and test group B is told that it might cause symptoms of nausea and shortness of breath and so forth. So, based on these two different versions of reality, the two test groups either do well or do badly, or report feelings of euphoria versus feelings of malphoria, whatever the opposite would be, feelings of being down in the dumps. And so, you can only take that so far. There is a kind of base level. I mean, they're both being given the same drug. There's underneath it all. There's a reality there, but the interpretation we give to things often pilots us in a good or a bad direction, depending on our understanding of our supposed understanding of what it is we're experiencing. We're all subject to feelings of sort of internal tension in one form or another. experience of those inevitable tensions has a lot to do with really how thoughtful you can be around them, around those things, and what kind of attitude, what kind of mental frame you can have for those things. So, Paul Talk commented on my last video that happiness is largely a matter of attitude, which is true. I might just add it's a matter of attitudes. There's a multiplicity of attitudes that we have about various things. I guess you could say there's a capital A attitude we have as a whole, as a single consciousness passing through time. But within every capital A attitude, every stance we have towards reality, there's a certain kind of juggling that happens with individual experiences and felt reactions. I mean, I think there is something a little mysterious about how moods can travel over a population, or can affect families and groups and regions. There's something beyond the human ken there. And this morning I just felt a wave of anxiety, and it wasn't clear to me exactly where it was coming from. I don't want to get too mystical, but I suspect that it has sources beyond, on some level, my own immediate family, my own immediate circumstances. I mean, everything I suppose is filtered through your immediate surroundings. And so in a certain way, it comes from your immediate surroundings, or you can reduce it to that. But more holistically, everything comes from everywhere. I mean, one might speculate about the practice of prayer and the efficacy of prayer and what is actually going on with God when you pray. If not some kind of transmission on a spiritual plane, that God is allowing you to be an accidental occasion for grace, an instrument of His master plan. When you pray, you become a collaborator with God on some level, and part of what I want to start addressing is theological tangles and misunderstandings, and my own misunderstandings or my own questions about justice. I started reading the Gorgias, the Platonic dialogue of the Gorgias, which is all about justice. And there are certain things about being a Christian that beg the question of, like, what is true justice? Because take the example of murder. If every person is bound to heaven or hell, and you murder someone before their time, I think there's a scene in Hamlet where Hamlet wants to murder what's his name, that scheming character who's friends with the king, and he's about to murder him, and he walks up behind him, and he noticed that he's bowed down in prayer, and he doesn't want to murder him because he doesn't want him to go to heaven. So he withholds his wrath for a more opportune time, perhaps when he's in the midst of a lie or some other malicious act, and then he'll pounce and send him down to hell. Is that a human presumption that murder? It would seem unjust for Hamlet to wield that kind of control over the fate of another soul, or for any human being in the act of murder to wield that kind of control over the fate of another's salvation. How could God allow something like that to happen? But then, say if that's not the case, then what? If Hamlet doesn't have that kind of control, then does everyone who is killed, regardless of their present circumstances, do they all go to heaven? Do they go to purgatory? They're given the benefit of the doubt. They get a kind of get out of jail free card. I mean, that wouldn't seem totally just either. Because say if everyone goes to heaven, then murderers are actually, the beneficiaries of mankind, because we should all just murder each other, because then we'll all go to heaven. So the understanding of true justice as it relates to the totality of human life is difficult to understand, and it's not so clear how any of that works. I mean, we, after all, are deaf, dumb, and blind to the spiritual world, and so what seemed to us like normal, rational formulations of moral dilemmas, a train is going down a path and you can hit the lever and set it a different way and it will only kill one person rather than 5. Do you get I mean, these moral dilemmas, these issues of justice are not very clear. And I think part of it has to do maybe with the fact that we don't really understand the nature of God or the nature of these things. Like, we think about heaven cartoonishly as a place where you sit on a cloud and play a harp. And, how could we have knowledge of these things unless we were truly pure of heart? And then maybe it would be clear, and the dilemma would resolve itself. It's like when William James talks about the debate about whether a squirrel is actually going around a tree or not, if you are encircling the tree yourself with the squirrel. And when presented with an apparent contradiction, Aristotle says one must make a distinction. And so one must try to make a distinction. So I'm trying to make a distinction. I'm trying to think my way a little bit more into Whitehead's philosophy as well, because I've been listening to these videos on the philosophy of Alfred Whitehead. And I listened to another one in which the point was made that space-time is an illusion, and that we might more fundamentally, might think more that the more fundamental level of reality is as a series of events. that space, our idea of space-time, is constructed out of events that happen, and everything is a particular event, that even God the Father is visible to those who are pure of heart. We tend to think of God as invisible. These things and they are invisible, but only because we are blind. We don't have the sensory apparatus, the pure heart stone apparatus to see these things as they really are. Apparently Alfred Whitehead was one of the few mathematicians who really understood Einstein's theory of relativity when it first came out. And it was that engagement with relativity theory that drove him into philosophy. I studied Einstein's theory of relativity in my senior year of college, but I could not grasp much of it. It made a big impression on me, though, because I'd have to go into class every day and hit my head against it, and it just kind of made an impression on me as such a contradictory, but at the same time real statement of things. And a big scientific breakthroughs like that, I think, take at least a century or so to really sink in to the minds and hearts of everyday people. But I think more and more, the 21st century is shaping up to be a period of deeper spiritual engagement. The 20th century was this flippant era of sort of prideful materialism, snot-nosed materialism, and through trial and bitter error, a large contingent of humanity is beginning to wake up a little bit more to some of these realities, to the reality of the spiritual world, to take it seriously as something to be discussed, to consider it. And yeah, so there's the kind of pop psychology, wow, is it, look at that, look at what suggestion can do, and the power of belief, and so on. And then there's the biological reality, say, of disease. And Jesus is the person who shows that there is a continuum between those two things. When he, for example, touches lepers, another one of the things that these virus mathematical models don't often account for is that not everyone has the same susceptibility to infection. So that's another thing. And if you're regularly fasting, if you are, you can fast your way out of cancer, out of anything, maybe not anything. We all have our time to go, but fasting has this incredible purgative power. So if you're in a state of fasting, say, you're probably a whole lot less likely to be infected by any kind of virus, even if you come into contact with it. Jesus went on a 40-day fast before his public ministry. On some kind of intellectual or spiritual level, if you are similarly pure of heart, if you have chastity, the virtue of chastity, then a lot of the spiritual contagions won't infect you. And we live in a kind of zombie apocalypse sort of world, I suppose, because there are those who see the absurdity of globo homo and clown world, and there are those who don't. And it's like a spiritual contagion, basically. We should try to have understanding and sympathy rather than hatred, maybe. I don't know. Because it has this collective quality. It's the place of individual responsibility, regardless of a person's beliefs, is difficult to figure out. That is to say, even if someone has the best opinions about things, the nature of true justice in relation to that person is not clear. Or oppositely, if someone has some terrible opinions, some terribly untrue beliefs, the nature of what is just in regard to that person is likewise not totally clear. So, as Christians, we hold that God is the only just judge, and that we cannot presume to judge anyone's salvation. To say yea or nay at that most fundamental of levels. I just want to, in addition, address the issue of apathy and what I think about apathy as I see it in my own life. The temptation to be apathetic. Try to relate that a little bit. I must have picked up this formula somewhere, but apathy seems to be either excessive. Well, it's the same old split between despair and presumption, to use theological terms, or excessive faith in one's own good fortune, or excessive despair at one's tragic fate. That having a kind of insane expectation that things will turn out splendidly at all times is the same thing as despairing that everything will fail with respect to the experience of apathy. Because whether you think everything will go well or you think everything will go terribly, in both cases you think that it's beyond your ability to control or contribute. That regardless of what you do, things will turn out a certain way, whether that's good or bad. And so apathy kind of has this duality to it. It feeds feeds off of presumption and despair in equal measure. And often presumption turns into despair because you're presuming that something great will happen and then it doesn't. And so then you jump to the opposite conclusion that everything is terrible. Or you think everything's terrible and suddenly something very good happens. And maybe you jump to thinking everything will be good. But it's much more of a challenge to balance on the skateboard of reality. To remain cognizant that you are that you remain all too interactive with this thing, and to stay vigilant and to not lapse into drunkenness or whatever. It seems like contagion takes hold when a population is too homogeneous. The virus is just this little critter, this little microscopic critter, and it hops from cell to cell, and it has a certain mechanism. And, if we talk about computer viruses, I think that the comparison is apt because they're both simplistic mechanisms of self-reproduction. There's a kind of mechanistic quality to it where it only functions under a set of certain constraints, a certain set of circumstances at the biological level. So it can leapfrog from cell to cell as long as the lily pads, pods, aren't too spread apart. Apathy seems to be a kind of great equalizer. And can infect whole nations. If a whole nation as China does, seems to have this kind of like manic faith in its own manifest destiny, along with a kind of, underneath it all, hyper-normalization, sort of ingrained sense of despair, like, we are poor workers subject to these awful, inhumane conditions of getting our limbs chopped off, our fingers pinched as we try to make Pokemon gadgets for first worlders. That's sort of the suspicion about the Chinese, is that they seem less human on some level because of how homogeneous they are. There's less variation, and there's something sad about that, or it seems like a deficiency. They can't, for instance, technologically innovate. They steal technological innovation from the West. They've gotten really good at stealing it. There's like a 6-month lag time or something between what gets patented here and what gets made overseas. But I wonder if did I hit all my bullet points? I had to get to work. I think think I did. I think I hit every lily pad. Yeah. I have a sort of informal job-related type of discussion I'm going to have. Someone I'm kind of excited about. I might share more details if it comes to fruition. But my career might be improving soon. Let's see. I'll also try to do more. I want to try to do more miming and fun stuff. But I've been dealing with car issues and apartment issues. My phone SIM card burned out. My wife just got diagnosed with shingles. She thought she was dying. It's kind of funny. So she was